Welcome to Full Comp, a show offering insight into the hospitality industry, featuring restaurateurs, thought leaders, and innovators. Served up on the house. Most restaurateurs build concepts around a menu or a chef, but Justin Cucci built Edible Beats around a philosophy, one that challenged conventional wisdom and redefined what restaurant success can look like. From turning historic spaces into thriving concepts to pioneering an employee-owned business model, Justin has proven that restaurants can be both financially sustainable and deeply meaningful. In this episode, we dig into why he bet on an ESOP model, how he scaled without losing his soul, and what the next decade of restaurant leadership should look like. If you've ever wondered how to grow without compromising your values, this conversation is for you.
I think a philosophy it's much easier to connect that to multiple people. I think if you wrap it around one person, there's a singular voice, a singular idea, and sometimes a singular direction, which obviously is needed at times. But I just found, at least in my experience, that having something more collaborative, something that had more of a sort of a group mindset nature, and can the sum of its parts be bigger than the individual? So with Edible Beats, I think I was just really at a point in my life when I was ready to share. I was still sort of like a democratic dictator. Don't want to make it sound like it was all fun and games, but it really served well for how fast we grew and what we were able to do.
You always hear people talk about, I want my employees to think like owners, but it's very hard to give people that sense of ownership. Talk to me about what it was like to build out something of that nature, what it was like initially, and how it's evolved over time.
Yeah, I feel like we were fortunate that we had 10 or 12 years of experience and just running a restaurant day in and day out with a like-minded group of people that I really feel like, to all their credit, treated it like it was their own. Not everybody, but my core group of people, some of my leaders, some of my just kitchen people and servers, they had that mindset, which was a gift. I got to say, I didn't preach that. I didn't say that's what you have to have. I wanted it to come organically. So I probably went about it through the back door instead of the front door. And in doing that, I think we were able to just have a culture that was, again, organic. It wasn't something that I sort of listed what it needs to be or what it should be. I gave it some freedom. And I think that's one thing that I think I didn't know when I was younger, is that if you can give empowerment and some freedom, but still be there to be the guardrails, the voice of reason, and sometimes the iron fist if you need to, that you're able to get farther quicker. And so when we transitioned to be an ESOP, which is basically 100% employee ownership, we had those bones already. So now what that ESOP did is it made it real in a financial sense. I always wanted to share the wealth and wanted to have really great benefits, but now we put it on paper, we committed to it, we put numbers to it, and now we have basically a guidebook for anybody who comes into Edible Beats. This is how it's going to work in terms of your process, your vesting period, and now we have rules to it so that people walk in, they know what to expect. They don't have to be there and just figure it out like the first group of people did. So I think it's made it much clearer to people who maybe were not always willing to give more, do more, or feel more. Now they have something that they can at least hold in their hand and say, okay, I have a roadmap for how this ESOP works. And I, as any employee, have to be part of that. And together, that forms a stronger sort of culture of ownership than just my sort of original group of people, if that makes sense.
It does. And I do want to dig into the ESOP, but before we do, when you create this employee stock ownership plan, the foundation of that is that it's not a dumpster fire, that it's actually something that somebody would want to own. You would want to own it, then it has to have inherent value. People talk about exiting in the restaurant industry, and it's such an interesting conversation.
It is.
Because, who exits from multiple in this industry? There's like a handful of people.
Exactly.
That have achieved it. So you begin with the end in mind, and you would have to ask yourself, if an ESOP is the plan, then this thing needs to be inherently valuable. Nobody wants to own a percentage of your debt, Justin. That being the case, it would beg the question before we even get into the ESOP. How do you build a company that is worth owning?
Man, the $1 million or $10 million or $100 million question, depending on where you stand in your career. But that is a great question.
Most people settle for $100,000 question.
That is true also. Yes. You're right to your original point, because if it's a dumpster fire, 10% of nothing, 20% of nothing is still nothing. we were fortunate. We grew from one concept, one restaurant, into really six over the course of, let's say, 9 years. And we did that like pretty much every 18 months, we were opening a new restaurant. There was no plan. So I think number one, building wealth or value, I think I started by trying to build worth. How do I build worth for my guests? How do I build worth for the people who are coming in? Because worth and wealth are very different ideals. But I believe if we create worth, we're going to get to some sort of wealth, whatever that version is. So I used to just say like it goes guest first, culture second, and P&L third. And that's probably because I was a sole owner and I didn't have to answer to anybody. I was fortunate enough to use the SBA and the city to borrow my money because these were very expensive restaurants. And in normal terms, I would have needed a partner or an investor, but I really wanted to shy away from that. So I was able to set this guest first, culture second, P&L third as the way that we're going to build value. Luckily, it worked out. I can't say that it was all luck, of course. We definitely had to have a vision. And I think one of my main responsibilities, I feel like each day, is to present the vision. The vision some days was really simple. It was just excellence and showing what it looks like. Because I think so too often in the restaurant business, people want excellence and they want results, but they don't always show how to get there. They don't always coach people or inspire or mentor people. So I think early on, I just somehow figured out that that was how we're going to get there. We're going to spend as much time in investing in, we're really in the people business. We just happen to serve food. So I kind of switched my mentality from restaurateur to the people business. And if we could really sort of cultivate leaders and non-leaders and employees that cared and that wanted to deliver excellence day in and day out, I just figured we're going to be successful. And it worked out that way.
This is why the magic is in post, truly. I'll tell you a little story about me. So all I ever wanted in the world was to own a bar. And not like a high-end ultra lounge. I just wanted a dive bar. Eventually, I was able to find financing, and I opened it, and it was incredibly successful. But the minute that those doors opened and this thing was successful, all I wanted in the world was another one.
Right.
And then another one. And then another one. And then to get into fine dining. And then to get into fast casual. And like, why can't I just cannibalize the entire industry with all of my amazing ideas? So you say that there's no plan. You've got 6 restaurants under your belt. What I think is interesting is that the goal for you was never scale for the sake of scale. What do you think most operators misunderstand about growing the right way? And what did you learn after doing it half a dozen times?
Well, great insight. I feel I was the same way. If we could only just open our fast casual, our music venue, our airport
Right.
restaurant, and just do all these different concepts. It's true. So you have to be careful with growth. I think one thing is you have to know when to put down the pencil, whether that's just to rest or permanently. And I made a decision 5, 6 years ago, right on the cusp of COVID, that we were done, that what we had was a beautiful 6 children. And I didn't want to keep having kids for the sake of having kids because they're so cool when they're young. And then you get older and then you got to deal with all the older stuff, which my restaurants were getting older. But I was like, man, let's make these kids all just amazing. Let's just focus on that. So I think number one, you got to know when you reach your limitations because at some point it's too big for any one person or people. You need an organism, an outside organism, an investor group. And I never wanted to get there. So it helped me stay the size I felt I could manage. The other thing is like I was in a market that was expanding and we were lucky that even though we were opening restaurants at a good clip and even though the market was expanding every year and more people were moving to Denver, we just kept getting busier and busier. So we had this nice upward trajectory that didn't stop from 10 years. It just every year we got busier and busier. So that's obviously really validating as a restaurateur when you see you getting busier. But however, successful restaurants don't mean you're a successful business. And that was what the last couple of years pre-COVID is that I was like, man, we are such a successful restaurant group. But I kept taking the money that we would make on restaurant and I would parlay it on the next restaurant. Then I would take the 2 restaurants and parlay it on the third and go bigger. And so I was parlaying all my bets. But at some point, you have to have an exit plan. You have to have some rainy day money. And luckily, a couple of years before COVID, I really tried to change my philosophies and really focus on how do we build a successful business. And that's when the ESOP idea came about because the ESOP idea You really need to be a successful business, not a successful restaurant. And I had great advisors that I started to really pay attention to and listen to and realize how deficient I was as a business owner, that I was a restaurateur first and a business owner second. And I really tried to change that.
Let's imagine, from my own personal experience, if I was to start all over today, knowing what I know now, I could have achieved twice as much in half the time with a quarter of the expense. I'm sure most people would say the same. So if you were sitting down with a young restaurateur who's about to open their first place, what's the first thing you would tell them to throw out from the traditional restaurant playbook?
Woo. I mean, maybe one or two.
Where to start?
Where to start? I mean, one is that I feel like is a difference between myself and many other chefs that I've met along the way who are not open anymore, is like it has to start and end with the guest, because I think there's a lot of chef-driven concepts. And I think that's a dangerous thing because you're relying on one person's vision, but you're also validating the person who's not going to pay your rent. This is the person who's eating up your rent. You want to validate the guest. So I think if, as a young restaurateur, I would say make sure you validate the guest and their experience, whether it's dietary restrictions, whether it's special instructions on their food, whether it's coming in 5 minutes after the doors have been closed, giving good phone. I mean, there's so many ways that I think restaurants still don't really validate guests. And I think we are endlessly trying to validate guests. I always tell people, like, we're just searching for yes. We're not always going to find yes. There's going to be no. But if you know, as a restaurant team and as a restaurant group, that we're searching for yes, when we get to know, it's a way easier conversation. You've already bought into us emotionally and vice versa. But I think restaurants and chefs sometimes like to say no and like to not validate the guests. Maybe that's a little too esoteric, but that one has worked for us really well. And that has given us, I think, raving fans that still work through our hard times. And when we have a really shitty service, I think they'll forgive us, as opposed to writing us off.
You think about the ESOP and you think, oh my God, I can only imagine what this dude's life looks like. Like, everybody's an owner. Everybody's into it. These people are lifers. Everybody's a diehard. Man, everybody thinks like an owner. And that's just not the case. I have never been to any of your restaurants, but I would assume that there are a handful of people there that are just there for the paycheck. They're on their way to something else that is going to be great for them, and you are just a pit stop along the way. So I think that for the lifers, what you're doing is you're showing that there could be a real career here. And if you want to spend your life in this industry, that there is a future here, and it's a future worth having. I'm sure it helps with retention there. For everyone else, right? For the college student that is working on their doctorate, for all of these people that are just passing through, how do you engage them? How do you keep them as interested and inspired as the life?
Great question. And so true. It's easy to think that this button got pressed, that we are an ESOP, and everybody changed their life plan to now stay in Edible Beats, which is definitely not the case. And we are a pit stop for a lot of people. We're just the way station until they get to just something better in their life. I think we really try to understand that we're not going to capture everybody. And so as much as we're trying to do that, and as much as we're trying to preach to everybody about the benefits of ownership and the psychology and the fact that we are asking for no money for you to be an owner of Edible Beats, you do not have to put in any money. You just have to work here and care. So I think in terms of caring, just in people's day-to-day work, I feel like we've noticed a difference. We feel like that bar or that floor has risen. In terms of people being interested in the ESOP in the big picture, that is definitely a hit or miss. There's people who are at a point in their life that I was at one time, where I didn't care about 401k and I didn't care how rich it could make you if you put $20 in a week. The ESOP is a bigger picture thing. It's definitely not like Bitcoin, where you're going to come in tomorrow and all of a sudden we're going to be worth $50,000 a share, or now $100,000 a share. So it does take a certain person at this certain point in their life. The way that we also try and do it is by honoring people's own LLC. An LLC, for those of you that might not know, is just an initial for a limited liability company or a business, right? Everybody has their own business. If I'm a 21-year-old college student living in my mother's basement, I have a business, and my business is paying my bills, doing the things I enjoy to do, and having some money left over for whatever. And we want to not disregard that they're running their own life business. So we try and feed into that idea of, like, we all have our businesses, we all have our bills to pay, You all want to make a certain amount of money, and so do we. And so, like, how do we get there together? Because if we can get them invested in just seeing a return on the investment of, like, if you work harder and care a little bit more and tips are better, then you can get more money to do the things you want to do, much like us as a business. And really, for that, it's freedom, right? Can we just find more financial freedom together? So we try and just speak about that so that even the person who's living in their mother's basement, no offense to that, there's nothing wrong with that, that they can still see that we're just on a macrocosm what they're trying to do each week, which is pay their bills, have a little fun, and have something left over to do, go to a concert. That, I think, is just an everyday thing for us. It's like maintenance. Every day we have to do maintenance on validating our staff's time. But for the lifers, it's definitely a different mindset. We try and have much more transparent financials. We have more in-depth conversations. We try and empower so that people are actually having things they can work towards. And the way they see that happening is our share price, because just like anything with shares, we started as a share price. Our initial share price was 60 cents. Nothing to write home about, but in year 2, we doubled that share price. And I always say, like, hey, going from 60 cents to $1.20, that's not a big whoop, but it's 100% increase. And I was like,
Yeah.
if you can invest that on any stock in history, you would do that in a heartbeat. And even though we didn't grow a lot, we grew our stock by 100%. And last year we grew it by 35% because things were even harder, but we still grew. So I think if we can just share our stock price with our lifers, let them understand how it works, which is the more successful we are, the higher that our share price is going to be.
And then talk to me about communication. One of the biggest hurdles in my career, and I think for everybody, is making people understand while not making them fearful. My thought process was, and I'm a huge fan of Ari Weinswig. I've had him on the show a bunch. He's like a friend and a mentor. And like, he was a huge advocate for like open book accounting, that you share your P&L with your team, whether the busser likes it or not. The busser is going to know where we are this month. And my thought process was this: I will do that once we're making a shit ton of money. And, and then that day never really came. So I was like, well, maybe we'll just do it and we'll see what happens. At that stage in my career, we were very much middling, where I'm sure most of the people listening are, right? Made a little bit of money this month, lost
Yep.
a little bit of money the next month, made a lot, lost a lot,
Yep.
so on and so forth. But here's what I found. I found that people aren't as easily scared as I thought they would be. And generally, once they knew both the reality of the situation we were in and what they could personally do to improve it, we were good. And I found that all of that could be done as long as the people that work for you and with you are level-headed and engaged to a certain degree. When you transitioned to open book accounting, what did that process look like? And did you scare the shit out of anybody?
Yeah, that's another great question. Middling is definitely our middle name for many years. That was inevitably just how it worked. And it can be fun nonetheless. But yeah, ultimately, when we switched to being an ESOP, we had to have a deeper understanding for our top leaders down to our restaurant leaders and then managers. And so when we started slow. We didn't just immediately start ripping off the bandage and go right to the P&L bottom line. We started to have like gross margins, which was, here's what you guys can control. So that was our first step, was making sure that they understood, like, if you hit this number, anything above it is good, anything below it is bad. And so that probably helped for most of them. But I had definitely had probably my like executive chefs and GMs, especially, and sometimes AGMs that were hungry for more. And so with them now, we share through the bottom line. And one of the fears we had was exactly what you said. What is going to happen when in January, if we are deficient a lot of money and we had to put, almost, let's see, 6 figures into to save this business for the month? Is that going to freak everybody out? Is everyone going to see like, holy
Yeah.
shit, we lost that much money in January and you expect me to believe in this company and hang around? So I know for us, the language and the verbiage, we really try and craft with them. We're like, hey, we're talking amongst leaders here openly, and we need to have an open conversation. But this isn't the message you want to go in the restaurants and say. You want to find a different voice to try and reach the same means. And that's a little bit of a challenge, because I think when people leave meetings, some people leave like, we got this, man. They just showed us that it was labor and food costs over by 12%. And if we trim that, we're back to break even in January. But I think some people just saw the holy shit, we lost $100,000 and like, when is this ship going to sink? So I think it's a balancing act. I think the part of communication that I think we've always tried to abide by was just this fearless communication. Like it's sort of that open book with P&L, but like we wanted to be open book with the way we communicate, and we wanted staff and leaders to be fearlessly communicating to us. So we've always had this fearless communication, but we haven't always had the P&L open book. And so together, I think they were a good fit, and I think people were maybe used to just hearing real talk from us. We didn't try and sugarcoat it.
You mentioned earlier this commitment to the customer. But what that requires, and I literally just had this conversation with a new client the other day, which is why I bring it up. I'm talking with the client. I was like, look, I want to run an item sales report from your menu, and I want to see what by unit sales. I want to see what the bottom 20% of your menu looks like. And so we run the numbers, and I'm like, we can cut 25% of your menu, and no one's going to notice. And he's like, I'm not going to do that to my customers. I have customers that love this part of my menu. To which I said, the fuck you do. The
numbers don't show it.
The numbers do not reflect that. Or they reflect that a few people love it, but they don't have any friends, which isn't helpful for you either. When you talk about servicing the customer, his biggest objection to me, Justin, was that he is leaving these things on the menu because of the love that he has for his customers. Right? You hear that a lot from chefs.
Yes,
right?
100%.
This is what it is. And it is because they're not taking a sober look at the numbers and how their customers really feel. They're looking at it through rose-colored glasses. You're a chef, not a chef unlike almost any other chef that I've ever met in my life. But how do you stay away from that? How do you not fall in love with the things that you create?
So this is, to me, smack dab in the conversation of vocal minority. And if the guests love it, like you said, it would be showing up on the P-Mix. But the reality is it's not turning into sales. And so maybe we all do. We've taken things off the menu that the first day we take it off, the thing that sold one a month, on day one, servers we can't, you see, people are already asking for it. So I guess in a bigger sort of scope, I'm saying we all, as chefs and owners and people with the vision, have to understand that we create crap sometimes and we have bad ideas and we fall in love with the process of creating, but the end result is the guest has to validate it. And that's where I was going maybe before, is a lot of chefs validate themselves. And I try and make sure that I'm validating the guest. And sometimes that's easy. You pull a P-Mix and these bottom 5 items are going to save us many hours in labor and a bunch of hours in bandwidth and make us leaner. But at the end of the day, I think it takes the person at the top to make sure that they have a good internal compass for that and they don't get their own filter involved of whether man, I created those dishes. I know they're good. They might be, but maybe in a different market, at a different time, in a different place. So you use the word so many times already, which I love from when I first started talking to you. You use the word context. Man, context is king. And I think as a leader, you have to be able to read context in positive ways and negative ways, and in ways where you have to make really hard cuts or you have to make additions, because context is so informative and it can change minute to minute, season to season, block to block. But if you can't read context well, you're at a disadvantage to the people who do read context well. And especially ones that are, again, validating the guests first, not their ideals of what their restaurant should be. And so I've always had an open source and, again, highly collaborative, where there was a time when I was making sure every item on the menu went through me, went through my hands, my palate. Now I'm just more the producer. I'm I want to taste every beat you lay down. I want to taste every bass line, every guitar lick, and then I'll help craft it. I add a little echo, add a little distortion, more BPM. But at the end of the day, I want my chefs to feel empowered. And at the same time, then it's easier for me to also come in and say, hey guys, these bottom 4 menu items, I know you love them and maybe some guests do love them, but they are making us really heavy and we have to cut them if we're going to be leaner and more successful. So there's no magic to it. I think it's just a matter of being honest with yourself and not letting the filters get in the way.
I'm going to keep tugging on that context thread because I think that it's valuable. One of the paradigm shifts that happened for me in my career was I joined a group called EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, which is like 22,000 entrepreneurs worldwide that all have businesses that generate more than $1 million a year in sales. And it's industry agnostic. And so I was surrounded, and I was like the only restaurateur in the Los Angeles chapter. So for me, it was transformative because I got to hang out with all of these other entrepreneurs, with all of this other experience in all of these other industries. And it just widened my aperture. I had a wider worldview than I think most restaurateurs, or at least for myself. And then I look at you and I see like you're an audiophile and a deadhead, and you've played around in fashion and you've built all of these restaurants. And I'm curious to know, how does what you've been exposed to outside of the industry inform how you build restaurants today?
Yeah, I would say music probably informs me the most. Food and music are just two of the most transformative cultural languages that can cross cultures, cross countries, etc. Both of them are great because you don't have to speak a language to appreciate the food or the music. It helps sometimes.
Sure.
So I always tie them together. All my LLCs for my businesses are all after Steely Dan lyrics. Some of my businesses are named after some musical terms like Root Down and Ophelia's specifically. And so music to me just informs me because, yeah, being a deadhead, I really tied into the sum being greater than its parts and really believing in like the sort of alchemy of collaboration and how that can really make something much better than I could have done on my own. And so it informs me in that way, in terms of the way I approach every day. And also, I think just the improvisation part, which is probably every restaurateur's sort of sometimes secret weapon or secret poison, because we all have to be really good improvisers and you have to find a way to do it. But like the jazz cats, I think it's really like you have to be able to have a foundation of practice, practice, practice to improvise well. And I think I see a lot of people thinking that it's just like, oh, this is just like making it up as we go. And so I always just try and stay true to that and just still practice my craft, whether it's the food, which every day, whether it's eating, watching a movie, whether it's music, it just somehow just like filters through my brain in a way that it's like inspiring. And most of the time it just inspires me at work because that's my outlet. And so I think just together, yeah, I'm just lucky that I have a lot of very disparate influences that are not one dimensional. I think sometimes it's hard to be on a one track mind or a one track. And that's why I hope the restaurants, when people come in, somebody said that they feel like the design is like a Tarantino movie, which I thought was like a really cool concept because I don't know how they meant it. And I can't really see the connection except that they're really like bold and maybe just like ultra colored. And I don't know, there's something about it that I thought like, I kind of get that, but I kind of have no idea what they're talking about. But I like the compliment because I want people to leave the restaurants beyond feeling food. I want them to feel like a connection. And yeah, we can make connections through food, but it's even deeper when it's a connection through the people and the philosophy of the restaurant and the design. Because, you know, the restaurants that I've chosen to open have been very specific with having a history and a time and a place that we've honored, whether it's a gas station, a mortuary, an old brothel, or a candy factory. All the restaurants except L5 have had a great history. And we've really tried to make the sense of place come through in your dinner experience. So I don't know. For me, it's just being a New Yorker. I'm probably just a big fan of like mashups and remixes. And so I'm just constantly trying to like remix things from different areas to make a new thing that hopefully resonates.
I want to talk about the power of long-term thinking. So we're all long-term thinkers the day before the restaurant opens, right? And then you open it, it's day one, it's invariably a dumpster fire, and then most of us spend the next 5 years scrambling. But it's different for you because you finance your restaurants differently than most restaurateurs. Most don't go to the SBA. Most find financing through friends and family, colleagues, other restaurateurs. There's this author I love. His name is Gino Wickman. He wrote a book called Traction that changed my life. And in the book and in his practice, he talks about the power of thinking in 10-year blocks. I think that it's hard for most of us to do when we exist in an industry where everything is both urgent and important to the degree that it's impossible to differentiate between the two. But then I look at you, Justin, and I say, well, this is a man that has 10-year loans, 15-year loans, I'm sure all with a personal guarantee, for what I can only assume is a shit ton of money. And you don't have the luxury of short-term thinking. You must think in 10-year blocks. So with the loans you have, as you look forward with the expectation, not that you will be sustaining, but that you will be thriving in 10 years, what are you betting on? What are the ideas that you think are going to define your restaurant group over the next decade?
You have to ask the hard questions, huh?
I do. We're at the end. I have to figure this shit out. This is what people expect.
Man, yeah, I definitely, because I really felt like opening restaurants, which my staff all makes fun of me, who have gone and played craps with me. I'm a big parlayer. Whatever I win, I want to just keep growing that. And so in a way, I'm short-sighted in that way. That's not a long game. That's like short wins. So in one respect, I'm parlaying all the time. But at the same time, I try and balance a healthy amount of long-term thinking, because I do have to make these restaurants work and pay off a 10-year loan. And I do have my house collateralized by it and my life insurance collateralized, etc. So I have the most to lose. So it keeps me obviously invested in the long game. And I don't know if there's any sea change that I had inside of me, other than the reality is your house and your life insurance and the things that the few things you have are now bet Edible Beats being successful. And it's going to take this long to do it. Probably just mother invention made me look at things in bigger blocks, because I think by my nature, I like the moment. I really try and live in the moment. And I love, like I said, just sort of being in the short term. And I think just advisors probably realized that I was way heavy on that side. And I think listening to advisors and really paying attention to them helped me look at the long term and the 401ks and the succession plan. That's how the ESOP came about. They asked me almost 9 years ago, what are you going to do when you're too old to do this? What are you going to do if you get sick? You get hit by a bus? And I never thought about those things. We were on this just joyride of opening restaurants and rock and roll. And it was great. But the reality is like, I had none of those plans until my advisors. So I guess one I would say is get really good advisors who aren't yes men, who challenge you, who say, you might be great at this, but you're not great at that. And I think being open to that took me a little bit of time before I realized it. I'm like, come on, got successful restaurants. We have 500 employees. Like, what am I doing wrong here? But when you really get a vision of like what the future is and how to get there, and you also learn that most people want to hear what that vision is. Most people who come to work want to know, what is the vision of this place? Not always 10 years. Maybe it's just like, what's the vision this year? What's your vision for growth? What's the vision for our next 6 months? So I got better at it just by necessity and growing older. I don't think I would have had this perspective in my 20s or 30s. Luckily, I hit my 40s and 50s, and time was telling me to like pay attention to this shit because it's limited time. So I wish I had better insight other than get old and know your limitations.
That's Justin Cucci. To learn more about Edible Beats and how they're reshaping restaurant culture, visit ediblebeats.com. Hey, it's Josh. I wanted to take a hot minute to thank you for listening to today's episode and to ask that if you are getting value from Full Comp, please like and subscribe and be sure to leave a review. Those reviews matter and they help other independent owners and operators find the show. Also, if you want to take the stuff that we're talking about in these episodes from idea to execution, head to joshkopel.com. There you will find a ton of free templates and tools and all of the details on upcoming learning events so you can keep building momentum. I know you're busy, and so I don't take your time for granted. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.